Hello there, welcome back to Jennie Designs with Paper and this week's episode of Crime and Coloring, where we take an alphabetical journey through the United States and revisit some of the earliest crimes. But before we talk crime, let's talk coloring. Today I'm going to do some watercoloring with this picket fence rose stamp. I'm using my Magello Mission Gold watercolors. I have Canson's Monteval watercolor paper. This is a 4x6 inch pad. And my sentiment will be from this Simon Says stamp set. I'm going to do a little bit of white heat embossing on black cardstock for the sentiment. I will also clear emboss the rose image onto my watercolor paper. That creates kind of a wells to watercolor in. I don't have to worry about avoiding wet areas. When I stamp the flower, I will stamp it at least 3 times because watercolor paper is textured and it doesn't stamp pretty the first time. The background of the card was my mom's idea. Say hi to my mom. She's sitting here with me today. And we're going to make the background with alcohol inks. I think that's all about the stamping. So let's go ahead and jump on into our crime. Our journey today takes us to the country's capital, Washington, D.C. The nation's capital was made necessary after the United States Constitution in 1789 called for the creation of a federal district. D.C. was designed in 1791 by Pierre Charles L'Enfant. It is divided into quadrants. All of the quadrants are centered off of the Capitol building. Prior to the building of the White House, the presidents conducted the nation's business in Philadelphia. Sorry, words are hard, and I can't see very well today. John Adams was the first president to actually live in the White House. Many of the nation's first children had pets in the White House, including multiple alligators, a raccoon, donkey, a bobcat, many dogs, a small bear, a lizard, a guinea pig, a regular pig, a badger, a blue macaw, a garter snake, and even a one-legged rooster. During World War II, there were sheep that lived on the lawn. They were brought in to graze the lawn down in an attempt to save manpower. The wool was then sold to raise money for the wool was sold and the money was donated to the Red Cross. There are no skyscrapers in D.C. The Height of Buildings Act of 1910 ensured that no building could be built taller than the width of the adjacent street plus 20 feet. And that regulation is there to maintain the visibility of the Capitol and Washington monuments. Let's see. DC residents nickname their Safeway stores with monikers that include the Swanky Safeway, the Soviet Safeway, the Stroller Safeway, the Unsafe Safeway, and the Senior Safeway. Okay, I don't live there. That's weird, but okay. The famous cherry blossoms were a gift from a Tokyo mayor in 1912. Among the alphabet streets, there is no J because the J and the I look too much alike in early typeset fonts. D.C. is a natural place to find spies. I mean, it is the home of the Spy Museum. And in D.C., politics and news reporters and their shenanigans led to the shot heard around D.C. First, I think we should meet William Preston Taulbee, Taulbee. He was born on October 22nd, 1851, to Senator William Harrison and Mary Ann Wilson Taulbee. William was born near Mount Sterling in Morgan County, Kentucky. He attended common schools and was tutored by his father. He was eventually ordained in the ministry and admitted to the Kentucky Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church, South. That was a lot of words in that sentence. He studied law and was elected clerk of the Magaffin, Magoffin, that is a real place, county court in 1878, and then he was reelected again in 1882. While he worked with the court, he studied law and won admission to the bar. In 1884, William ran for a seat in the United States Senate's House of Representatives. He was elected as a Democrat and served 2 terms, winning his first reelection in 1886. William married Lou Emma Awney in 1873, and the 2 of them went on to have 8 children, all boys. Now, their actual family tree said 8 children. One of the sources I saw said they had 4 children. There were at least 2 of their children who died at birth or within the first year of their birth, so take that as it is. But they had all boys. This would be a good time to meet Charles Easton Kincaid. He was the son of William Garnett and Elizabeth Frances Banford Kincaid. Charles was born in Boyle County, Kentucky, also a Kentuckian, on May 18th of 1855, and he was the oldest of his parents' 8 children, 4 girls and 4 boys. Charles himself never married. He did go on to obtain an AB degree in 1878 and a master's degree in 1881 from Centre College in Danville, Kentucky, and was admitted to the bar in 1879. It is almost inevitable that these two men would meet. I mean, they're both from Kentucky. William and Charles were rising stars by 1887. The 36-year-old Senator William was already a respected member of the House of Representatives, and he was called, quote, the Mountain Orator because he was tall. He was tall and lean, and he had the ability to sway his listeners. One source read, or the sources I read said he was over 6 feet tall, like 6'2" or 6'3", something like that. Charles was 32 at this point in time, and he had been elected as a municipal judge in 1879, and then he went on to edit a weekly newspaper before moving to Washington, D.C. in 1885. He went to D.C. as Senator John Williams' private secretary. After his move to D.C., Charles later became the Washington correspondent for a number of prominent newspapers. It should be mentioned here that William was, like I said, taller than average, but he was also stronger than average and was reportedly a very healthy individual. Charles, on the other hand, was not. He was short and in terrible health. He had been born with an eye defect that narrowed his vision. He had a tumor on one eyelid, and he nearly died 2 times in 1885 from attacks of typhoid. And he never fully recovered from those illnesses. He also had liver disease and digestive problems that doctors said were due to stress. So he picked the wrong profession and gave himself ulcers. I don't even know. At this point in their lives, their meeting would become a story for the true crime history books. It is also this time in the story that the facts of this case kind of split into 2 very different paths. Let's begin with the path that I found on the senator's wiki page. He does have a very short Wikipedia page. And according to this source, Charles was working as a newspaper in the DC area, and he wrote and published a series of articles stating that William was, quote, profiting from his congressional service. This obviously created a less than friendly relationship between the 2 men. Now, the other sources that I read, like all of the other sources, did not actually mention this as being the antithesis, that word I can't say right now all of a sudden, the big major point, sticking point of their problem. Most of the sources including that wiki page, actually went on to name another source of contention. In 1887, Charles reported that a then very married senator was having an affair with a young woman who worked in the U.S. Patent Office. He actually wrote in his article that the 2 of them, William and this young woman, spent an unusually long amount of time in a file room alone together before leaving to go have lunch together in public. And he wrote that the 2 of them, quote, were rather warmer than they were proper, end quote. So I guess that was newspaper speak for they were all over each other, even in public. This story was bad enough, and the affair was bad enough. It was printed in the DC paper, but it got worse for William when the story was reprinted in the New York City papers. William's wife of 17 years left him and filed for divorce, citing adultery, which was a major thing in the 1800s. Fearing correctly that his political life was ruined, William did not run for his next re-election. Instead, he began practicing law and turned to our favorite post-political profession. He became a lobbyist. Now, William very publicly stated that his fall from office was Charles's fault. It could not possibly have been his fault or have anything to do with the fact that not only was he cheating on his wife, he did it in public. There were many times that others would recall William vocalizing his hatred of Charles. Okay, funny story. My mom has a brother named William and my mom has a brother named Charles. Neither one of them are lawyers or politicians, but it's kind of a funny story. Side quest. Unfortunately for the two men, their lives were destined to continue to cross. Charles was still working as a reporter, and his connections to politicians afforded him the opportunity to report and interview politicians, lobbyists, and other newsmakers. It was literally his job. Often, when William saw Charles coming or was made aware of his presence in the capital area, he sought him out, usually shouting and yelling at the smaller man, accusing Charles of ruining his life. There was more than one instance of William actually physically attacking Charles. Like one source said, he actually threw him across a hall and into a wall. It was also noted that Charles often apologized to William in public for the story, attempting to kind of have these public attacks cease. It didn't work. On February 28th of 1890, at about noon, William is once again at the Capitol building doing his lobbying thing, talking and socializing with senators and congressmen. Now, according to Charles, as he was walking into the Capitol building to conduct an interview, he had an appointment. He was approached by William, who was still incredibly unhappy to see him. And when Charles sees William walking toward him, he reportedly said, quote, "I have no time to talk with you. I don't want any trouble with you," end quote. He then claimed that William shouted at him and grabbed him by the shoulder and by the ear and he was violently pulled by the larger man. Charles then stated, quote, "I am a small man and unarmed," end quote. And according to Charles, William retorted with, quote, "You had better be armed or go and arm yourself," end quote. And that's exactly what Charles did. He left the Capitol building, went to the room he was renting, and found his revolver and loaded it, and returned to the Capitol building to conduct his business. Whether or not he intended to go there picking a fight is debated, but he did return to attempt to do his job, according to him. Now, here again, we have multiple accounts of the same scenario. I mean, that happens, right? There's three sides of the truth. His side, her side, and what really happened, or his side and what really happened. But anyway, at about 1:30 p.m. on the same day, William was finishing his business on the hill and was walking down the stairs toward the restaurant that was in the basement of the Capitol building. Here, he and Charles would meet again, and this time there was a witness, a man named Samuel Donaldson. He was a doorkeeper of the house, and he told everybody, including in his testimony at a trial, that he was walking with William downstairs together, and Charles stopped above them and called out to them. And as William turned, Samuel said, quote, "At this moment on the landing just behind us, on my right and on Mr. Talby's left, Mr. Kincaid appeared. Mr. Talby's face was turned partly toward Mr. Kincaid when the latter said, 'Mr. Talby, you can see me now,' end quote." So according to Samuel, they were going down the stairs and Charles was on a higher landing than them. He called out to them, said, "You can see me now." And then when William turned to face Charles, Charles shot him with the pistol. The ball hit William just on the outside of his left eye, and according to Samuel, it spurted blood all over Samuel's left hand. Samuel later testified that he said to Charles, quote, "Judge, for goodness sakes, don't shoot anymore," end quote. Because Charles, he was a judge, or had before been a judge. Anyways, when the ball struck William, he cried out, "Oh!" and staggered off in a stooping position down the stairs. So he was running away-ish, and he was assisted by other people on the scene to a conference committee room. When people started asking who shot him, William didn't have much to say, but Charles confessed immediately. He told everybody there that he had done it. He killed him. Charles didn't argue most of the details of the shooting. He confessed, but his version of the deadly day is different. Charles said that he approached the Capitol building for his appointment and was verbally assaulted again by William after telling him he didn't have time to fight with him. Then he left and went and got his pistol. When he came back, he saw other reporters and he asked them not to report this altercation with William. Apparently, there had been times in the past where their public altercations had been printed in the papers, and he asked them not to do that. So he has this conversation with his reporter friends, and then Charles heads down the stairs to the basement. I guess his appointment was in the restaurant too. I don't know. According to Charles, he did not realize that William and Samuel Donaldson were standing at the bottom of the steps. And once William saw Charles, he raised his hand and started to approach him. Now, Charles said that he said, quote, "You're going to kill me, stand back," end quote. And as he was walking backwards, he drew his gun. And to that, William reportedly said, "I'll show you," and then continued to march toward Charles as he retreated on the landing on the steps. According to Charles, once William was within almost an arm's reach, he was convinced it was William's life or his own, so he fired his weapon. In this version, Charles also admitted he was the one who shot William. He claimed, though, that it was self-defense. So the whole time, Charles never says, "I didn't do it." He completely admits it the whole time. So William is taken to the doctor, and the doctor thinks, okay, this is not fatal. Maybe you'll lose an eye, whatever. It's not fatal. But over the next few days at the Providence Hospital, William's condition worsened. The ball from the revolver couldn't be located and removed, so an infection took over William's body. He died at 4:45 in the morning on Tuesday, March 8th. So I think that's about 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 10 days, something like that. There was an autopsy performed by a Dr. D.S. Lamb, and he revealed that the ball had passed under the eye in a downward trajectory. It fractured the eye socket and it headed toward the brain, and then it splintered and was embedded into the bone and the surrounding brain membrane. Okay, gross. Dr. Lamb concluded that the penetration hadn't been any deeper or had gone in even just a little bit farther, it would have been instantaneously fatal. So it kind of bounced off a bone and saved his life for a minute. In its report on the day following the shooting, the New York Times wrote, quote, "Who was the aggressor at this last meeting, or what position either man occupied with reference to the other at the time the shot was fired, it is impossible to state definitively," end quote. But not necessarily. Another piece of interesting information was that Congressman Carlisle saw William right after he had been shot and asked him who shot him, and apparently William said that he had not seen his assailant. Now, the autopsy indicates that the ball, being in a downward trajectory, that means whoever shot it has to be taller than the man it went into. So that does indicate that Charles was standing higher on the stairs than William was. And that kind of lines up with the account of Samuel. The inquest jury found that William died from the shot of a pistol that was, quote, "held in the hand of Charles E. Kincaid in the United States Capitol building on February 28, 1890. That was all that the inquest said. They didn't elaborate too much, I guess. It was kind of, I think it's interesting that William said he didn't know who did it. Yeah, I don't know. So after confessing to the shooting, Charles was released pending an investigation. Charles again voluntarily surrendered himself and was taken into custody after William died. And he was jailed for just a little while and then released because of his frail health. He was also allowed to return to Kentucky to recuperate and await the trial. During his recuperation time, newspaper editorials in the state proclaimed their support for Charles, and a group of prominent lawyers began to prepare his defense. His legal team included, and the chief lawyer was U.S. Senator Daniel Voorhees from Indiana, C. Murray Smith, a prominent Washington advocate, Jeremiah Wilson, a former Indiana judge and congressman, and Charles Grosvenor, a 3-term member of the House of Representatives from Ohio. There were a couple of continuances requested. One was granted because Congress was still in session and 2 of the defense team were city congressmen. A second was denied. One of the defense team had a heart attack and wanted time to recover, but the judge said that the rest of the defense team could handle the case. The trial began on March 23, 1891 in Washington, D.C., with U.S. Attorney Charles Cole leading the prosecution's team. President Benjamin Harrison, there we go, words are hard, had just appointed Cole to this position 3 weeks before this case, and this was his first major case. Now, because of the publicity, most of the people who were potential jurors had already formed an opinion as to Charles's guilt or innocence. So as a result, only 4 of the original 26 members were accepted by both the defense and the prosecution to serve on the jury. Another 50 individuals had to be summoned and interviewed before a jury of 12 was finally picked. During the next 2 weeks, those 12 would hear the testimony of nearly 60 witnesses, some of whom came from as far away as Massachusetts and Louisiana to attend. I'm guessing senators, congressmen, politicians, something. The defense team argued that their client acted in self-defense. They presented a long list of times that William had both vocally and physically attacked Charles. 8 current and former members of Congress, as well as a number of newspapermen, testified about William's numerous threats against Charles. One said that William frequently remarked that he ought to kill Charles because Charles had ruined his and his family's reputation. Another indicated that William threatened to kick Charles' head off if the correspondent ever came within 10 feet of him. A third quoted William as saying, quote, "He ought to be killed, I'll kill him," end quote. Many of these witnesses warned Charles about the threats, and according to the defense lawyers, this contributed to Charles's real fear for his life. The prosecution, however, claimed that Charles sought out William with the intent of killing him in revenge for the assault he had suffered earlier that day. This is when Samuel Donaldson testified that Charles waited for William as they walked down the stairway, which seems weird if the shot had to come from above. That seems weird. That just clicked in my head that was weird. Before the former congressman knew that Charles was there, the reporter called out, "Toby, you can see me now," and fired, according to the prosecution and according to Samuel Donaldson. The prosecution also argued that even if the shooting happened exactly as Charles said, that he had a duty to flee before firing his gun. According to Cole, the prosecutor, shooting William in self-defense was only an option if Charles had been backed into a corner and had nowhere that he could safely run to. Otherwise, the killing was still manslaughter. Of course, the defense countered that Charles had no such duty to run away. There was also a dying declaration entered into evidence. Reportedly, supposedly, whatever, William told his brother 3 days before his death, he said, quote, "I did not know Kincaid was near and did not know who it was who shot me until I was told," end quote. And the defense kind of hammered away at both Samuel Donaldson's testimony and then William's brother's testimony, pointing out inconsistencies and raising doubts. I think I would have left the brother's testimony alone. I mean, William's again saying, "I don't know who shot me," but whatever. On April 8th, 1891, the jury was sent to deliberate. And after only a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Charles was found not guilty. I know, that was like not even the most suspenseful story ever. A few days after the end of the trial, Charles returned to Kentucky with his sister and his nephew, or a nephew. He would later serve on the Kentucky Railroad Commission and as an American diplomat. I did not look into where he served. I should have done that. Oh well. In 1896, he returned to the newspaper business and became a reporter with the Cincinnati Enquirer and continued to report the news. Although if the Cincinnati Enquirer is anything like the National Enquirer, it's probably less news and more junk. However, Charles's health remained poor. He never ever got healthy, and he actually died in 1906 at the age of 51. And despite all of his accomplishments, okay, he was a lawyer, he was a judge, he was a reporter, he was a railroad commissioner, he was a diplomat. The thing he was most famous for when he died was having been the man who shot Congressman William Talby. And that, my friends, is the story of the shot heard around DC, or the first shot heard around DC. Probably not, because this is post-Revolutionary War, but whatever. And it didn't have any twists and turns. It didn't have a cliffhanger or surprising ending. And, you know, it's not really surprising that politicians would end up enemies. It is a little surprising that they would end up fighting and killing each other in public. Yeah. The card. So I originally planned this card to be on a black card base. And then I mathed bad when I cut my green alcohol ink background paper. So I had to overcome and adapt. We Tim Gunned this one all the way to the end. We just made it work. I was not throwing it away. I had done all the watercoloring. I had done all the alcohol ink blending. There we go. Those are the words. I was just going to Tim Gunn this one all the way to the end. So I cut apart the original card base, the black card base, and used it to make mats for those pieces of green alcohol ink paper that were too small, and I made it work. Also, it took me forever to figure out which direction to put the rose in and which place to put the sentiment in on this card, because decisions are as hard as words. Sometimes I just don't like to make them. Let's be honest. Sometimes I just don't like to make those decisions. So I'm going to add this card to my Mother's Day card stash. I don't know who I will send it to. My mom saw me making it, so I can't send it to her.
Why not?
Oh, she says, why not? Because you watched me make it, Ma.
I quite like it.
She likes it. I do too. I think it turned out great. I chose orange for the roses because when we lived in Oregon, we had one rose bush that made these crayon orange roses, and they were my favorite, and I've never seen a bush like that before or since. In the end, there was a lot of open space, and it just needed a little bit more bling, because if I'm not doing all the things, what am I even doing? Yeah. And I had to put a whole bunch of bling on here because, again, my brain fights. One side of my brain wants there to be even amounts, and the other side of my brain says, dummy, it looks better when they're odd. So I have two groups, and I have an odd number of pearls. These are spellbinders, flat back pearls, by the way. I got them as a free gift when I ordered something else, but I'm sure you could buy them. Anyway, I also found a couple of pictures. Yay! First, zoom in on the card. We'll close up look at there so you can see some of the watercoloring on that rose. I love how it turned out. This is William. And this is William. And the next picture is Charles. They're both kind of dandies. I don't know. Handsome men, I guess. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I have a couple of other videos here I think you would like as well. I have also added that subscribe button. If you have not subscribed, go ahead and do so now because you know you want to. Leave me a comment down below. I want to know your thoughts on this story, or on the watercoloring, or on the anything. Give me a thumbs up if you liked the video, and have a really fabulous day.